So Gallup has been doing a survey of the American workforce since 2000. And they study a whole bunch of things in their survey, but one of the things that they look at is engagement among the workforce in America. And the most recent year for which we have data is the survey from 2010 to 2012. So this is kind of as we're coming out of the recession. And what they found is very interesting. It is that 30%, roughly, of the American workforce is engaged in their jobs. You got 52% disengaged. And disengaged is kind of like you're just doing what you need to do to not get fired, right? You're not particularly giving a lot of effort. You don't maybe enjoy it so much. You're just kind of clocking in, clocking out, doing what you got to do, like that. And then you've got 28% that are actively disengaged. And active disengagement is like sabotaging the company you work for, right? Like actually actively driving customers away, actively gumming up the works, like being obstinate in meetings, trying to frustrate the efforts of the company. 28% are doing that. So that's interesting. That's 70% of people not engaged. Some of them so much so that they're kind of belligerent, right? This is the state of the American workforce. And the thing is, this hasn't changed that much. It actually, these numbers are up a little bit from what it was during the Great Recession. But since 2000, this has been just about steady, right? Just about the same. So at least for our lifetimes, our working lifetimes, this is kind of how it has been. The estimated economic cost of this situation is something between $450 and $550 billion for the American economy. They call it the holding back economy. That if there were some way that you could get a greater percentage of people to be engaged at work, you would produce this much more value, economy-wide, and certainly for all of our businesses, that would make a difference. But one of the things that my team and I have been really interested in is those are the economic costs. But what about the personal costs, right? What does it actually do for people when they're in a situation where they're either disengaged or actively disengaged? And that is the majority of the people that work in the country are in one of those two categories, right? The vast majority. We spend a third of our adult lives at work. A third of our lives doing something that we really could care less about. Doing something that doesn't really matter much to us. That sucks, I think. And disengagement has been linked with chronic disease, right? So there's actual health consequences to this as well. So when we think about work, a lot of times we disassociate. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. But if disengagement actually is, if it's powerful enough that you spend a third of your life being sort of disengaged, that you're actually getting chronic disease happening, then the personal and the social costs of this thing, I don't even know how to start to measure that, right? We've seen massive economic costs, but I'm not even sure that's the most expensive part of it. So it's just an interesting situation and an interesting question. I was at a conference in Chicago about 3 weeks ago for an organization called Conscious Capitalism. And one of the guys that was one of their keynotes was this dude. He's the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller. It's a $2 billion kind of parts and manufacturing company. He's built it to be that big by acquiring a whole bunch of small machine shops and parts manufacturing things across mostly the Midwest, but other places too, and internationally. And one of the things that he says he really had his eyes open to was when he read a different Gallup report that makes this assertion. The number one determinant of happiness for people is a good job. Meaningful work among people we care about. And that was really interesting to me because now we're starting to conflate concepts a little bit, right? There's this engagement and then there's happiness. And as far as we've been able to tell, these are all sort of hitting at the sides of the same thing, right? There's different kind of ways in. And we're not super refined on how to talk and think about it just yet. I believe, and we believe, that this is one of the critical questions that our generation must answer. If America is going to maintain its economic strength in the years to come, this is an essential problem. And so for us to do this for ourselves and to make sure that it's happening in our companies is critically important, in my opinion. And so I just want to share with you some of what we've been starting to learn And there will be other opportunities maybe to talk with you later about what we continue to learn. One of the things that's been very influential for my thinking is a book called Drive by Daniel Pink. And in it, he looks at what motivates people, what actual human motivation comes from, right? And he boils it down to three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That we all are driven to and motivated by opportunities to advance our autonomy, our mastery, and our purpose. And as far as I've been able to understand this stuff, money is autonomy up to a certain point, right? So if you don't have any cash, you just can't do very much, right? You can't say yes to going out with friends. You can't put gas in the tank to go somewhere for the weekend. Your autonomy is very constrained if you don't have enough money to be able to pay for the basic things in life, right? Where you live, how big a house, what you can buy, all of those things are part of autonomy. And if you don't have at least a certain level of income, your autonomy is constrained. And so money is autonomy up to a certain point. And the point, other research suggests, is about $85,000 a year for an individual. So once you're at 85K, the difference between 85 and 90 is not really that much in terms of your autonomy and your advancement and your happiness. The difference between 45 and 50, though, that's a lot. Those are important $5,000. And especially below that, right, there's a lot that's there. But once you get up past a certain place, more money doesn't necessarily mean more autonomy. It doesn't mean more fulfillment. It doesn't mean more happiness. And it stops being something that motivates us. Above a certain point, with money in particular as a motivator, you look at like I don't know if you'll have friends that are like lawyers, you know, have lived in DC for a while. There's a lot of people that are making like the $250K law firm jobs, but they are owned, right? It's every week, it's 80 hours a week. It's totally crazy. And yeah, they can spend a lot of money on whatever they want, but in terms of autonomy, it actually they passed the tip of the curve there somewhere, because they can't anything. They can't have weekends. No autonomy. And that's, for many of them, I would look, maybe that's why most of them really not liking their jobs. Some of those folks that are in the actively disengaged column are making tons of money. So it's not money, or at least not past a certain point, right? Autonomy then is things like flex time, things like vacations, things like being able to say how it's going to go for you at your job, not just taking the direction from the managers and having to execute, but actually being able to participate and say how it's going to go, right? All of those are other parts of autonomy that are beyond money, but we don't usually talk about that kind of stuff very much. And it's just becoming to be in vogue for business to even start considering those things. And that's only one of the three areas. The next one is mastery. And mastery is basically just being able to be really, really good at something. Whatever that something is. And for some people, it's building companies that make gobs and gobs of money. And for them, they are a master entrepreneur. And that's what they do. And they get great sense of personal satisfaction and fulfillment for doing that. For others, it's being able to really, really know what's wrong with the car, just from listening to it, right? Mastery. In almost a Zen sense of it, right? There is that thing, whatever that thing is for you, that you're just, you're good at it, and you want to be good at it. You want to be one of the best that there is. That's mastery. And so many times at work, though, we don't talk about that with people. We don't talk about what their strengths are and what they really want to do and what they really want to get good at. But that's a major motivating factor for people. If somebody asked you, or if you've ever been asked by a leader, or if you know yourself, this is my thing. I really know how to do this. You're working in a bank. I know there's a couple of bank folks here. Maybe it's just calling which loan is the right one to take a risk on, right? All of those kinds of things can be a form of mastery. You just got to figure out kind of what that is. But whatever it is, if you don't think that you've got your thing, that's a hole for people. That's a missing. So that's part of happiness, part of motivation, and I would argue part of fulfillment. And then finally, purpose. Now, purpose is a particularly big deal. You may have read some of the research. Just a quick show of hands. Who's younger than 34? Almost everybody. Okay. That's millennials, right? Born after 1980. And they say that the millennials are, they say a lot of things about us. I find one myself. But one of the big things is that we really don't have a lot of time for stuff that isn't purposeful. We really want to know that what we're doing makes a difference and matters for some reason beyond profit, for something. It doesn't have to necessarily be huge and grandiose. Even if you're just making a good salary for your family, and you're the first one in your family that's been able to do that, that's purpose. That's great. Or you're involved in a big global environmental group and you're actually trying to solve climate change, or whatever it is that you're doing, some higher purpose is really important. It is to all people, but millennials, when they're polled, rank this much, much, much higher than others. And for many big companies, this is their major problem right now, is trying to figure out how the heck do you engage these millennials? How do you get them to care? And purpose is one of the major things for us. And I think it's a major thing for all people, but we just poll a little bit higher there. So purpose, as far as a company is concerned, this is now getting way out there, right? We don't really talk about that much, especially in good business discourse. You don't look at your stock prices on different things and say, well, what's the purpose? Well, the purpose, of course, is to maximize the shareholder value, right? Maybe it shouldn't be. There are, in my opinion, a few flawed narratives that are just taken as gospel. We don't really think about it too much. Work-life balance. There's work and there's life. What? There's life. That's it. There's life. And a third of it you spend at work. You don't balance who you are at work with who you are. You're who you are. It's life. That's all there is. And so if work isn't consistent with life, if work isn't consistent with who you are and what you believe and what you do, then that's not a balanced kind of a situation. That's a lack of alignment. That's just a totally crazy thing. So this whole work-life balance, well, it doesn't matter, it's just work. The rest of my life is great. No, life, just life, right? So that one really bugs me a lot. There's another one that is sort of this is largely unspoken, but if you check in with yourself, you will probably catch this line of thinking. There's a social narrative that we have in the United States in particular that suggests that you have three phases if you're successful. You learn, then you earn, and then you return, right? So you learn when you're in the junior positions and jobs, you kind of climb your way up the corporate ladder, and then you make it, and you get a lot of money, right? And then once you have a lot of money, you can start being charitable. And you can give to charity, and you can support nonprofits, and you can help the little guy that's coming behind you by maybe investing in a business. Learn, earn, return as a model, right? The problem with that is that it suggests that you can't return until you've learned and you've earned. And that's not purpose. That purpose thing is gone until you're retired. And then your whole life was not that. And I think that's wrong too. So there's a different viewpoint, which is rather than learn, earn, return, you're sort of doing all of that all the time. Because even when you're a rich executive, to suggest that you're no longer learning is crazy. And you obviously want to be continually earning for everything, but the returning, the purpose, the why you're doing it, the real reason you're doing any of this at all needs to be present the whole time. It's just weird that we think that you don't have to do that, because that's not who human beings are. That's not how we work. Profit maximization. I'm going to say a lot more about this in just a sec, but that the purpose of business is the maximization of profit is an idea that I think is a little bit flawed. And the rationale and sort of the backup that I'll give you for that is that Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, right? Before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. He was a moral philosopher, not an economist. He's the father of capitalism. But his version of capitalism existed because he believed that capitalism was the single best way to create broad social prosperity. That through free markets, you can lift people out of poverty and actually have a world that works for the broadest possible number of people. And if you look at the history of the past 200 years, that's exactly what's happened. It's great. But at some point, we got a little confused about the goal. The goal is not profit maximization for its own sake. The goal is prosperity. The goal is trying to figure that stuff out. And right now, there's this beautiful new book, huge economic text by a French economist called Capital. And he basically makes the argument that accruing huge piles of money and not investing in capital, right? Capitalism, that's the whole point, is one of the major problems we've got as a society right now, because it's so much wealth accrued in different places that's not being, and I'm not talking about social welfare give-back programs, I'm talking about investment in entrepreneurial endeavors. That's how capitalism is supposed to work, for the purpose of broad social good, not for the purpose of individual ridiculous wealth, right? So with profit maximization, it's almost like we confused it, right? Where money is the goal, but money's just a proxy for the goal. And it's the easiest thing to measure in economic terms, and especially for a young science of economics in the middle of the 19th century, that was the easiest thing to measure, because it was simple. But now we've gone past that. You need to measure other things like social capital and environmental capital and all kinds of things, but we don't. We're stuck on money. Value maximization might be a better way to put it, but that's way beyond profit and money. And so we'll talk more about that in just a second. But that one, we gotta get past that. The last one is corporate social responsibility, and how is corporate social responsibility possibly not an accurate thing? The frame that corporate social responsibility lives in is that you've got a company that is out doing whatever it does, right? And which is usually not seen as particularly noble or good necessarily. Bad environmental record, bad labor rights record, but it's okay because you're going to do good stuff too. You're going to balance the bad by having a good corporate social responsibility department, making sure that you're participating in your community charities and stuff like that. That's great. You can't do that, I don't think. That's like the whole work-life balance thing. I'm not going to get this right, so forgive me. But there's a thing about moral distance and morality. This was a thing that was popular during the height of the British Empire. That you've got these barons and these dukes that are these pillars of society in Britain, and they're terribly generous and they're giving to everything, and they're enslaving most of India. But because it's India, because we don't have the internet, everybody's like, oh, look at what great people they are. They're so amazing, right? But that's not the deal. And so there's still a holdover, I think, in a lot of corporate mentality to you can do what you need to do, but as long as you get a good corporate social responsibility, or you yourself have done whatever you needed to do to make your millions, but look at you now, you have your name on a library and a museum, and you're such a pillar of society. There's a higher bar, and I think we need to strive for it. Back to Barry Wehmiller and their CEO, Bob Chapman. He summed up a very, very interesting talk by saying that there are three things that they'd sort of learned along the way for their company. Now this, from the expansive analysis of business structure in the United States, this kind of zeroes right into corporate culture. And corporate culture has a huge impact on how people are. If you've got a fear-based, really toxic culture, I think you may, whether you're there now or have in the past worked in those kinds of places, most people who experience that in a social circle, in a business, in a family sometimes, unfortunately, but that toxic culture versus something that is safe and caring and loving. That's one of the things that Barry was talking about. And Barry said that and the reason he was on stage at this conference is because he, better than possibly any CEO of a company that size in the world, has actually achieved a corporate culture that feels like that. And he said that there's three things that they learned. One was people want to know that who they are and what they do matters. That's purpose, right? Listening is a rare gift and the most powerful act of caring. I'm not sure where to plug that in, but listening is one of the big things. But caring, both you about what you do and people about you, right? That number one determinant of happiness, a good job among people that you care about, that thing is important. And I'm not sure quite where to put that, but that's important. And then the thing that he said, and the thing that he drove home again and again and again, is that how we lead has a profound impact on the lives of those entrusted to us. And that I just thought was an interesting frame. The lives of those entrusted to us. You never really think about it that way. Who manages people? Who's got folks under you? A few folks, yeah. Lives entrusted to you. If they're spending a third of their life at work, that actually is kind of true. And that's a hell of a responsibility. But that's very much how it occurs for him. And let me show you, let me just give you a couple stories that he told about how that shows up in his workplace culture. At Barry Wehmiller, they take over, they buy companies. And when they come in and they sort of do a big culture overhaul because they've been able to be as successful as they have been because of that culture. And so they took over this one plant in Green Bay, and there was this guy that's there. I think his name was Mike, and the CEO came in about a year after they had done the takeover to see how everything was going. And Mike was sitting in a group of machinists, real blue-collar crowd. A couple of them hadn't even graduated high school, maybe a couple GEDs, but that was their deal. They were working for this company for a long time. Mike's 45, maybe. And Barry asked, how are things going? And Mike said, well, my wife's talking to me. And he said, I don't understand. And he told the story. He said, it used to be that I didn't like my job very much, and I was, admittedly in a really bad mood most of the time. And so when I would go home, I would take my hat, I would open the screen door, and I'd toss it in. And I would wait. And if the hat stayed in, it meant that my wife was in a reasonably good mood, and she could let me come in. And if the hat came back out, I couldn't come in. And I would just go to the bar and spend the evening down there and just go to sleep after that. And most nights the hat came out. And he had lived like that for 10 years. But now, since the cultural revamp, there's something that's different in terms of the engagement and the fulfillment that Mike had at work. And he doesn't even have to throw the hat in anymore. Now his wife just talks to him, and he can talk to her too. And so the impact of that is not about the economic performance of the company, which is really good. It's the human element of it. And you can imagine for a factory that has 2,000 guys like Mike in a town, Green Bay's not a tiny town, but 2,000 guys like Mike going home every night. And what that does for a community when you're able to build that kind of a culture at work. Amazing. The other story that he told is a guy that had been discovered at one point to be padding his expense reports. And at even the most progressive and forward-thinking companies that I know of, as soon as you're found to be stealing from the company, out, door, now, gone. What they did instead is they got his supervisors together and they called him into an office. And he sat down and they said, we've discovered that you have been padding your expense reports. What's happening? And he said, I'm going through a really tough divorce. My accounts are frozen. And this is the only way I can eat. I'm buying food on the company card. It's the only way I can eat. And so they said, all right, well, obviously that's not going to work, but let's get you on some sort of plan here so that we can give you like a monthly cash allowance so that you'll be all right, and we'll put you on a plan to also pay back everything you took from us. And I don't know whether the man is still working there, but obviously this story is one of the stories that they tell about real caring in a workplace culture. Because for them, it goes way past the business. It's about the people whose lives are entrusted to them. And it really is. So they're doing great as far as money is concerned. They've grown a ton, and they are now a big example in the whole firms of endearment, conscious capitalism space for what this kind of culture looks like. But for me, that was very, very powerful to hear him kind of talk about this stuff, because I had never really thought, I take it to a certain level, but they take it all the way. And it's working great for them, even on financial terms. So this is the question, and this is something that I want to invite you to start to consider for yourself and for your company, is where are you in terms of fulfillment? How is your corporate culture? Is this something that you actually pay attention to or not? Should you? Do you want to? You can start to ask these kinds of questions, and if you start to factor this kind of stuff into your math, if you accept the premise, there will be major benefit, social, if not financial, but probably financial too. So that's it. Thanks for your kind attention. I appreciate it. And if you've got any questions, we can have a little dialogue here for a few minutes, then we'll all get back to work.